this um, welcome to this third session of the fourth year of the Circle for Late Antique and Medieval Studies, CLAMS as we call it. We have an exciting program for you today with two outstanding speakers, and we're going to begin in a few minutes. In the introduction to our session today, I would like to take a moment and make a statement. Um, the following. We begin today in memory and grief of tens of thousands of souls, men, women, and children, who were recently killed in silence by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Many were taken in the darkness of prison cells, denied even the dignity of farewell, their bodies consigned to unmarked graves. Estimates vary, but human rights investigations confirm that thousands of those who demonstrated against the Islamic Republic regime were gunned down. Thousands others have their lives taken in prisons, their voices silenced in hiding. We pay homage to the innocent lives that have been taken and continue to be taken down by the Islamic Republic. So, after this sorrowful note, I would like to begin our session. We have an excellent program in this seminar of CLAMS program. CLAMS ready for you. CLAM stands for the Circle for Late Antique and Medieval Studies. As you know, we are in the third program of our fourth year. Usually we have four programs every academic year. So we have been around for a little while, and we are doing um, very nicely, if I may say so. Um, Okay, our first speaker today is Dr. Gad Barnea. And Dr. Barnea graduated from the University of Haifa, where he now teaches also at the Department of Jewish History and Thought. He is a research fellow at numerous institutions, including the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland, in the project BEST of École, Gad will tell us what that stands for, of the École Biblique et Archéologique Française de Jérusalem, and at the University of Haifa, his alma, at the Department of Biblical Studies. He is the author of many important and fascinating papers. I was just told that he is the author of three forthcoming books. One is coming out from Palgrave and has the provisional title of Understanding Elephantine, 550 to 399 BC, the Jewish colony at the edge of the Persian Empire, and another edited volume, if I'm not mistaken, Gad, um, it's a memorial to our dear and departed colleague, Professor Shaul Shaket, whose absence really is so vivid for everyone. He has three forthcoming books, and I'm really looking forward to seeing and reading them today. And he has many articles, as I said, and I wish you could access his academia.edu uh, page to see the fascinating topics that he's working on. Our second speaker, which I needs no introduction, but I will introduce as when he begins to speak, is Professor Geoffrey Herman, who holds the chair of Ancient Judaism and Rabbinic Literature in the Department of Religious Studies at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, PSL, in Paris. We are anticipating Geoffrey's talk, but we will start now with Dr. Barnea's talk. Gad, you have the platform. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Parvane. I really appreciate the kind introduction and the invitation. And it is also a pleasure to share this virtual stage with Geoffrey Herman. And I'm also looking forward very much to listening to his presentation. Okay, so I'm just sharing the screen here. Let me know when you can see the full. Everything okay?
Yes,
Okay,
excellent, excellent.
fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so without further ado, so this is a photo of Elephantine Island. I'm going to talk quite a bit about Elephantine Island today. And this is really a very good place to start considering the impact of the symbiosis of Jews and Iranians. Now, I'm going to use the term Jews and Yahwists interchangeably during my presentation today. These are not exactly the same thing. Yahwism precedes Judaism in many ways. In my view, and I'm going to talk about it just in a couple of sentences, Yahwism is the cult of the deity Yahweh, and it will spawn off Judaism later on in this, especially in the third into and especially in the second century before the Common Era. But it will continue in its own right, at least until the end of the Roman Empire. This is an entire other research project that I'm working with a number of my colleagues on, and it's a fascinating research in its own right. But I'm not. But all this to say that we're going to talk about Judaism and Yahwism, even though they are not exactly the same thing. Where I'm going to refer to them interchangeably in this presentation. But when you hear this term, you can think Judaism or Jewish people. When I talk about Yahwists, that's fine for the sake of this presentation. So as I said, this island, the island of Elephantine, is at the is really a historical library of sorts of symbiosis between the empire, the Iranian empire of the Achaemenids, and the Yahwists slash Jews who lived under this particular empire for 100 and somewhat years, 130 years, give or take. So at that particular location. So we're going to focus quite a bit on this particular island, which is this island is actually at the Upper Egypt or the south of Egypt, right next to Aswan. If I could pan this photo a little bit to the left, you would be able to see Aswan already. It's very, very close. This is a quote from the letter of Pseudo Aristeas that a lot of people refer to when they seek to understand how the Jews came to Egypt. And I read from it. Many Jews had already before this entered the country along with the Persians, and others had at a still earlier time been sent out as auxiliaries to fight in the army of Psammetichus against the king of the Ethiopians. But these immigrants were not so large a body as those whom Ptolemy, son of Phlegon, introduced. So we see here successive waves of migration of Jews from the Levant. And when I say these are not just people from Judea, these are also Samaritans. And so this letter is talking about people from Jews from the Levant coming in successful wave. There is a lot of problems understanding this particular sentence, this particular paragraph. I have an article specifically about the migration of the Jews to Egypt. These first waves, or this first wave of migration, very complex topic in its own right. But just to show that even in the, let's say, second century before the Common Era, there was already this tradition that there were already several waves, including a large one under the Persians. And now a sketch of these of the Elephantine Yahwistic, or if you will, Jewish community. They, according to my research at least, and the reference is at the bottom of your screen if you want to check out my article to know more about this and to agree or disagree with my logic there. But basically, according to my research, they arrived between 550 and 540 before the Common Era to Upper Egypt, not necessarily to Elephantine proper, but to maybe to Syene, to modern day Aswan, and then only move to the island. But in the 530s, they constructed a temple to Yahweh on the island. Probably before even moving to the island, they already started establishing that temple. That this is a full-fledged temple with priests, with sacrifices. It is a large temple, and it's really a complete temple. It's not a shrine or a sanctuary. It is an actual temple to Yahweh. In 526, according to the latest research, not 525 as we usually date this, but 526, Cambyses conquers Egypt, so the second king of the Achaemenid of Persian Empire, the Tisped dynasty, um, conquers Egypt, and then in 545 we have the earliest dated papyrus with Yahwistic names on it. So we can be sure, absolutely sure, that there were Yahwists already on the island 495, excuse me, before the Common Era. The features within this papyrus show that the people mentioned there are probably already second or even third generation members of the community. So we can take the clock back also to what I consider to be the time of arrival, about 540, 550 before the Common Era. And then from that point on, we have a whole set of documents from 500, give or take, to 519 before the Common Era. We have documents really covering the entire set of um, what one could expect from documents recording the life of a community, legal documents, personal communication, letters, ostraca, um, you know, literary works, everything, the entire gamut of what you could expect a community to produce is preserved in that period, and it shows a generally thriving community. A major event that we're going to talk about in more detail happens in 419 before the Common Era. A person by the name of Hananiah arrives in Egypt and changes the fortunes of this community almost overnight. That person is also the author of a papyrus called the Passover Letter, erroneously in my view. We're going to talk about this in more detail later on. And then in 410, before the Common Era, we have the satrap departing, a very elderly satrap at this point, having already reigned for 45 years in Egypt, departs from Egypt, and there is an immediate rebellion. That's also always automatic when there is a change in the ruling structure. There is always rebellion everywhere across the empire, especially in Egypt. So there is a rebellion when he leaves. There's a destruction of the temple to Yahweh ensuing at that in the context of this rebellion. And then we have the Yahwists petitioning to the authorities in both Yahud, the province of Yahud, and the province of Shamarin or Samaria. 404 BCE, Artaxerxes II ascends the throne, and then 399 before the Common Era, the actual end, I mean, the end was progressive, but the actual end of the first Achaemenid occupation of Egypt arrives and it is complete. And the last dated document from the Yahwist at Elephantine is dated to this particular date. What you see on the screen right now is what remains of the temple to Yahweh in Elephantine. It's basically just the floor, the tiling, and some of the walls. Not much has remained in the actual excavation, but we know exactly where it is from the documents that describe its location. there is no doubt that we have actually found the actual temple to Yahweh at Elephantine. This is its location relative to the Khnum temple. So you can see on the kind of lower right-hand side where it says Khnum Temple, the huge, really precinct of the Khnum Temple and how close the Yao Temple was to it. There's this main street about a meter wide separating between the two. So the Yahweh Temple is almost an appendix to the Khnum Temple. That might have important implications that we can only speculate on. But they were clearly very, very closely associated. These are some photos that I took when I visited. So you can see the kind of the tiling of the floor and the wall, and from the bottom as well. So you can see just how many layers already existed before on this site. Already thousands of years of cultic practice on this site before the Yaoists built their temple on top of this 2,500 years ago. So this is an island with a very, very long and rich history. Now, the I said initially when I presented the Yahwistic community at Elephantine that this is a very good kind of a laboratory of symbiosis between Iranians and Yahwists. And we see in personal names at Elephantine, at the time that the Yahwists were there, active on the island, we see quite a bit of Mazdian / Zoroastrian / Avestan elements in personal names of not, I'm not saying that these are Yahwists, but of individuals at Elephantine. These are probably Iranians or people who picked up Iranian names. People did that in the Achaemenid and under many empires. People, especially when they become when they receive ascend to a certain position of power, they take on names of the empire. People took, Greek names, for example, and of course we know of Iranian names that are also adopted. And so we don't necessarily know from the name if these are necessarily Iranian. I would venture to say that most of these are, but these are elements that are found throughout the period, especially in the latter part of the period where the Yaoists lived on this island. Very interesting names, very important names also for the history of Zoroastrianism and to see how these names are, what was actually known and understood from these personal names at that time. But clearly, we know that the Yaoists lived in close proximity with people who had these names, and we can assume, I think, and it's a certainty that they would know what these names mean and what the concepts are behind them. You live with these people; these are your friends. Some of these people are actually signed as witnesses to contracts with Yaoists. So these are people who lived very close and were friends, basically, were people or trusted people. And so these Zoroastrian concepts would have been familiar to the Yaoists on Elephantine. And again, I have an article dealing with that. That's at the top, at the bottom of your screen, if you want to dig deeper into these questions. And we talked about the temple of Yahweh at Elephantine. I'm giving you here just 4 lines of a very fragmentary papyrus on which it says that they write about the destruction of their temple, which happened in 410 BCE, and they describe all of the damage that was done to the temple. But they are talking about an offering that was brought to the temple to offer before Yahweh the God, and then they are talking about they mention the term atrodan, and the atrodan is what is today the atashdan, the fire altar, or really a better term is a fire holder. I don't like the term fire altar because it's not an altar. You don't offer anything, any sacrifices on it. It's a fire holder, and that clearly existed and was part of the temple to Yahweh at Elephantine. Okay, so some people might refer to this as syncretism. There are different ways to look at this, but clearly in the temple, or at least associated with the Yahweh temple at Elephantine, was also a fire holder, an Atordan or an Atashdan in the modern pronunciation of this. That is an extremely important data point to understand that there was a very close cultic symbiosis, not just people living together, but also adopting certain cultic practices. Again, I'm not saying that they are not, of course, they did not convert to Zoroastrianism. They did not see themselves as Zoroastrian, but religion always develops and always evolves, and always, even today, to this day, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, every religion evolves and takes on new elements. Some of them come from other religions, whether it's direct or indirect, and this is the case here. Another important element that we're going to dwell on a little bit more in this presentation is the Pascha, or a Passover. Now, when I say a Passover, I don't mean the Passover, what we know from the Hebrew Bible, this major feast, but an observation called with the same name, called Pascha. And I've published another article also that came out this year, actually, 2026, and talks about the Pascha in the Achaemenid period. And basically, this text that you're seeing here shows extreme, acute concern about the welfare of children. And this gives us an idea of what the Pascha was at the time. So it says, to Hoshaya, your peace. Now watch alone the toddlers until Ahotab comes. Do not entrust them to others. If their bread has been ground, and again, this is regular bread, it's not flat bread, it's not unleavened bread, it's just regular bread. Knead for them 1 kub before their mother comes. Send word to me when you, plural, shall perform Pascha. Do send word of the peace of those toddlers. So you see, the entire message is about the welfare of children and about some kind of danger that they are facing, and that they cannot be trusted to anyone except for their mother and this Hoshaya, who is watching them alone. So he has to watch one to one. There is clearly there, we don't know what the danger was, but some form of danger in the air, some kind of menace is being faced by them, and it is within this context that we need to understand the Pascha. Tell me when you're going to do this. Now, the fact that the author of this Ostracon is asking when shows that this is not the Passover, the biblical Passover, because if there is one feast in the Bible that is not only the day but also the time of day is fixed, it is the Passover. In this case, this is clearly some mobile observation that you don't know exactly when it happens. In the article that I refer to in the bottom of the slide, I show other examples of this, and it seems relatively clear that the Pascha at the time was more of a apotropaic ritual, meant to keep away the evil eye. There is no trace of any familiarity with the Pentateuch or any other part of the Bible in oral or written form among the Elephantine Yahwists, or anywhere else for that matter, not in Judea, not in Samaria, not in Babylonia. No trace of any level of familiarity with the Bible in the 5th century before the Common Era. And apart from the name, these ostracon mention nothing that might be related to this biblical feast of the Passover. No sacrifices are mentioned, no unleavened bread, but as I said, the regular bread is mentioned. The context is intimate, familial, and apprehensive. And for the author, Pascha was expected to occur very soon, but at any rate, it is clearly not attached to a fixed date. The feast of Pascha, in its early stages, seems to have been, as I said, an apotropaic event, or again, an observation to keep away the evil eye. And the echo of that actually is found in the Bible in Exodus chapter 12, where we read that Yahweh will pass over the entrance and will not allow the destroyer, this evil eye or this negative, the demon, to enter your house to strike you. And this is why you paint the blood on the entrance to the houses. This is an apotropaic observance. So the echo of an apotropaic observance is still preserved in the Bible, and according to at least my research, that was the original uh, Passover. Now, Hananiah, whom I mentioned earlier, this extremely influential person who arrives in Egypt, is the author of the so-called Passover letter. And again, I don't have time to go into much detail. So again, I put the reference of an article I wrote or a book chapter I wrote on this if you want to get more detail on this. But he writes this document to his brothers. He says, to my brothers Yedunya and his colleagues Chela Yehudia. Now, this is, by the way, the first time this expression appears. The Jewish troops, or as I prefer to see it, the Jewish people, because Chela in the Achaemenid Empire is the equivalent of Kara in Old Persian, and those of you who know Old Persian understand that this means people, free people, not just troops. And also in the imperial inscriptions, sometimes it's confusing to know if the author is referring to a military regiment or to a military group or to a people. Here, I believe that he's talking about the people. To the Jewish people in Et Elephantine, your brother Hananiah. The peace of my brothers may the gods seek after at all times. This is the very generic blessing. And now this year 5 of King Dariawahush, I have been sent from the king to Al-Shama. And unfortunately, as you can see, a lot of this text is missing, but then he says, you shall appoint for something, and from the day 15 to day 21 of a certain month, certainly the month of Nisan, you shall keep yourselves pure and beware. And so keep yourselves pure and make sure to keep yourselves this way. Something pure you shall drink, and anything of leaven, you do something with leaven, until the sunset of the day of 21st of Nisan. Something you shall do in your chambers, and you seal them between those days. And then he ends with, to my brothers Yedunya and his colleagues, Chela Yehudia, your brother Hananiah. Okay, so very fragmentary. A lot has been built. A lot of theories have been built on the very meager amount of data that we have here. Now, historically, the date range and the word chamir, or which is usually understood as leaven, have received the bulk of scholarly attention because of the assumed connection to Pesach, or to the Passover, or the Feast of Matzot, the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. However, the main focus here is beyond the dates, is on ritual purity and the consumption of some drinks. Some restorations of this papyrus try to read here a prohibition from consuming the drinks, but there is no prohibition, at least none preserved in this papyrus. So there is a consumption of a drink and a need to maintain ritual purity. The date range does sound, of course, like the Passover. If you come from a Jewish or a Christian background, that would be your first kind of instinct, and certainly was for me. But it is merely a heptad after the first full moon of the year. So it's not necessarily that significant, this 7-day period. The full moon was also considered the Thushu Aira, the day of the creator in Achaemenid Zoroastrianism. Henceforth, I'll just use AZ in this presentation. And the 7th day after the full moon also was considered a very special day. So the the fact that we have this date range does not necessarily point us to the Passover. Now, my article suggests to look at this from a different perspective. Again, because we have absolutely no evidence that the Passover existed in the 5th century before the Common Era, and this particular papyrus is often in scholarship said to be the earliest extra-biblical reference to the Passover. We have to tread very carefully when we deal with first instances of a biblical feast, or really first instances of any documented reality. And so since this is the first, and there are quite a few elements here that do not align with the biblical Passover, as I mentioned, we need to consider other options as well. As I said, the main focus here is on ritual purity and the consumption of a certain drink, and on possibly leaven as well. And we see that certain elements of Achaemenid Zoroastrian liturgy are the consumption of a sacred drink, the hauma, and the offering of the sacred share, the dron, which was often unleavened. We don't know when the dron started to become unleavened. Before that, it was a share of an animal that was sacrificed. But I would personally venture to say, and it of course has to be completely hypothetical, that this part of the Zoroastrian liturgy already started to be done with unleavened bread under the empire, because when you have such a huge empire to run, having to do the daily sacrifice of cows and sheep and things like that, that is extremely expensive and difficult and time consuming, etc. Transferring this to unleavened bread would make it a lot easier to observe across the empire, and it would make sense for that transition to have happened at that time, although, of course, unable to prove this. The centrality of the Halma in cultic practices is well documented in pre-Achaemenid and Achaemenid times already. So unlike the Passover, we do have documentation that this was already a thing at the time. And it is drunk unfermented, since there is not enough time during the ritual preparation of the halma for fermentation to take place. So this halma drink is consumed during the ritual preparation, and the intoxication derived from it is viewed as positive and is the only one that has the effect of reestablishing the cosmic order. So this is an extremely important, of course, element in the Zoroastrian liturgy, and it is seen as a purifying event in that tradition. Moreover, the clear evidence of an atrodan, as I mentioned earlier, in the Yahwistic temple at the same general time frame, to within a decade, provides a complementary point of evidence to the very high level of intimate syncretistic or symbiotic association with Achaemenid Zoroastrianism being practiced by the Elephantine Yahwists, and significantly the only cultic practices to involve an intoxicating drink, specifically one based on pressing and crushing, whether it's olives or the halma plant, and as well as unleavened bread, are the Yasna and the Passover. It's an observation or as a feast. There is nothing in the Egyptian tradition or the Levantine tradition that parallels this. So ultimately, these observations can support the hypothesis that the biblical Passover evolved over time from these Achaemenid Zoroastrian inspired cultic features in the 5th century before the Common Era to the form known to us from the Hebrew Bible, which would make this particular papyrus that we're talking about a possible precursor to the feast of the unleavened bread, or to the Passover. Now, the author of this document, of this papyrus, is a guy by the name of Hananiah, who arrives in Egypt 419 before the Common Era. When he arrives, and you've already had a feeling for this from having read this papyrus, when he arrives in Egypt, he already has a very high social and political status. He commands the Jews at Elephantine to observe a certain cultic observance. We have his name appearing in several other documents from 419 to about 410 before the Common Era. Each one of them, he is a very high-ranking, very powerful, very authoritative figure. And so my theory, which again, another article that came out late last year, and its references are also below if you want to get deeper into this. Between 419 and 410, or give or take, within about a decade, I mean, Hananiah had to undergo about a decade of training during that time in order to become the satrap of Egypt. And I'll explain why a Yahwist could become a satrap of Egypt. But this entire article is dedicated to this question. But my suggestion is that he was trained for a decade to become the satrap of Egypt and exercised authority. And we have that documented. He actually, in order to negotiate with the local governor, he does not deign to go himself to meet the governor. He sends his slaves to do it, and they do it successfully. So he is above, in a level of authority above the governor and satrap adjacent. There is in Achaemenid hierarchy, which is very, very strict, as you probably know, there is no space between the governors and the satrap. There is no additional positions between the two. And above the governor, you can only go up one level to the satrap. Hananiah is clearly at a level of authority that is far above the local governors. So that's why I call it satrap adjacent. Now, as I said, our Shama, the satrap, was already very old at the time, has already been reigning for about 45 years, certainly needed to be replaced. And replacing a satrap in a satrapy such as Egypt, which is extremely complex and rebels every single time, a decade of preparation is certainly something that you would not be surprised to find in this situation. And then in 410, before the Common Era, the end of the grooming phase, and Hananiah is positioned to replace the aging satrap, our Shama. A letter that is sent around maybe 410 before the Common Era shows how the Yahwists were being persecuted at the time. And here, this is a letter sent to the community at Elephantine by Mosiah, one of the leaders of this community, who was jailed at the time. And he says, behold, they are coming, he's talking about the slaves of Hananiah. They are coming to you. So he's telling the community at Elephantine, they are coming to you, look after them. Whatever desire and thing that Jeho and Ho, so these are the two slaves of Hananiah with Egyptian names, so whatever they shall seek from you, you stand before them, so that a bad thing shall not find about you. They shall not find about you. To you it is known that Knum is against us since Hananiah has been in Egypt until now. Excuse me. This is a very telling, this is the title of my article, but also a very telling piece of information. Since Hananiah has been in Egypt, our fortunes have changed. And whatever you will do for Hor, probably for your own good, you are doing. Hor is a servant of Hananiah. You lavish from your houses goods as much as your hand finds, give him. It is not a loss for you. For that reason, I send word for you. And he said to me, probably talking about Hor, send a letter ahead of me. If there is much loss, there is backing for it in the house of Anani. Whatever you do for him shall not be hidden from Anani. What I claim is that Hananiah and Anani are the same person, and there is a documented linguistic feature which I get into in my article about the Ain Chet interchange at the time. So it's the same name, Anani, Hananiah, and Ananiah here, and it's clearly these are servants of the same person. Okay, so this person here is extremely powerful, extremely wealthy, extremely influential, this Hananiah or Anani. Textual analysis reveals decisive evidence about the status of Hananiah/Anani, and the data points to an individual of extraordinary rank whose identity was universally recognized without need for introduction. In all of the documents that we have, Anani or Hananiah, they are never introduced with a patronymic, meaning that the name of the father is never mentioned. Now, Hananiah and Anani, we know, was an extremely extremely popular name at the time, also in the Bible, but we find it in many documents, also in Judea, in Samaria, in different places, different provinces from the time. So, such a popular name, such a common name, would always need to be identified with the name of the father, so that you know who you're talking about. And sometimes you need more than just one one to go one level up in order to be clear for that to be for the actual individual to be identified. But this one is never identified with a patronymic. He is well known. Even in the document that the Yahwists send to Jerusalem, asking for help in rebuilding their temple, they refer to him as simply Anani, without the patronymic. The governor of Jerusalem already knows who that is. No further identification is required. So, as I said, his authority, his place in society is satrap adjacent. And since we know that Arshama left Egypt in 410 before the Common Era, my analysis suggests that the person left in his wake as the new satrap, but ultimately the failed satrap is Hananiah. And another name that is associated with Hananiah from Egypt to Samaria.
Dr. Barnea,
Yes.
it pains me to ask you this, but please, if you can come to your conclusion.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over this, but just basically say that this, in my article, I connect Hananiah to Samaria. In my identification of this person is that he is an aristocrat from Samaria, a son or grandson of Sanballat, and as an aristocrat he was court educated in probably in Susa, and was sent to become a satrap in Egypt, and later, after failing his role as a satrap of Egypt, he was, and we do have that documented, he became the governor of Samaria in the early 4th century before the Common Era. Okay, we kind of talk about this, so I'm going to skip over this. This is another example of a non-Iranian becoming satrap. So if you, a lot of people always ask us, how could a non-Iranian become a satrap? Around the same time, almost simultaneously with Hananiah being satrap of Egypt, we have Belshunu, who is a Babylonian, becoming satrap of the Eber Nahari satrapy. So these examples, I mean, it's not the only one, but this is the closest one of satraps, of non-Iranian satraps taking over. Okay. Now, and very briefly, I do suggest this, and I've suggested it in a number of talks this year, that this story of Hananiah as a Yahwist or a Jew becoming the ruler of Egypt might be the historical kernel behind the biblical Joseph story of a Samaritan ultimately becoming the ruler of Egypt as well. In Judea, now moving to the Parthian era, we do have some of the most formative events of the 1st century in Judea took place in association with the Parthian Empire. We are seeing recent research that shows that the connection between the Judeans and the Parthians was much closer than previously thought. And in fact, the Parthians installed the last Hasmonean king in Jerusalem in 40 BCE. It is within this context that I want to very, very briefly talk about a scroll that I restored, that was found in Qumran and containing an unknown an exegetical legend based on the Bisutun inscription. following the in this scroll, what we have, and again, this is the only Achaemenid legend that we actually have surviving. We don't really have Achaemenid literature surviving, but we do have one that has survived in a copy of which has survived, and in kind of an edited copy of it has survived in Judea, in Qumran. And in that legend, we have a scene of a discovery of the book by Xerxes. The scene is set whereby Xerxes discovers a copy of the Bisutun inscription in a scroll, reads it, and it's sealed with 7 seals, and he has his scribes read it before him. And then after this follows a legend that seeks to elucidate the warnings that are famous in the Bisutun inscription on the liar, the person who lies and schemes against the king, or in general misrepresents reality. And so there is a paraphrase of this passage of the Bisutun inscription that is addressed to the citizens of the empire and the kings who come after Darius. And the next 2 columns contain 2 prophetic visions that are essentially one vision, two different versions of the same vision. Also, a popular literary topos found across the entire Near East at the time. And then the prophet who receives this vision warns the king and about the impending plot against him, and then he is rewarded very generously by the king for his loyalty and for the visions that he has seen. The last column of this scroll is an addition. It basically uses material from the previous 6 columns of the it kind of repurposes and reuses material from the previous 6 columns of this scroll and adds a Jewish aspect to it. So we can see how this legend evolves over time. But all this to say that we have a very, very long period here. So we Achaemenid into the Parthian era, where we have very close symbiosis between Jews and Iranians, affecting everything from cult to literature, and even identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barnea, for that fascinating talk. I'm sure our audience has a lot of questions to ask you, as do I. But I hope our audience has written down their queries, because we need to go to Professor Herman now and listen to what I am sure is going to be a fascinating talk. And then we will open the platform to questions and answers. Professor Herman does not need any introduction. Geoffrey Herman holds the chair of ancient Judaism and rabbinic literature, as I mentioned before, in the Department of Religious Studies at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, PSL, in Paris. He holds a PhD in Jewish history, rabbinic period, from the Hebrew University, and his research focuses on Babylonian Jewish history in the Sasanian era. So we are going also a millennium forward now, almost, yeah, because and focuses on Babylonian Jewish history in the Sasanian era and its neighboring religious and cultural world. Professor Herman recent authored or edited volumes include the famous Prince Without a Kingdom, the Exarch in the Sasanian era, which it's a magnum opus. Persian Martyrs Act under King Gyatsky's affairs, and Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, religious dynamics in a Sasanian context. Without further ado, I open the platform to Professor Herman. Geoffrey, please.
Hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, Pavane, for this invitation. It's a great honor to take part in this panel. We've heard a wonderful lecture by Gad. he's dealt with the earlier period with Egypt and a little bit of Judea. And so I'll deal with the later period, a later Persian Empire, ruled by the Sasanian dynasty, and also be focusing, therefore, on a different region on Babylonia. So they'll be dealing with the period from the 3rd until the 7th centuries of the Common Era. Let's see if I can share my PowerPoint. Do you see it? Yes, great.
Yes, great.
Okay, so this map will show us the Sasanian Empire actually in the 7th century. Babylonia is an important province to the left. And here we'll see an image of Iraq, actually, in the early Muslim era. And so
I'm
the
so
Jews
sorry,
in this,
Geoffrey.
yes.
Please excuse me, but if you run your slides, go on the slideshow, we'd have a bigger image of your.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Is that better? Okay, fine. So that's okay. So here we have an image of Iraq, and the Jews lived in the south. We have another map which focuses on the Jewish communities in this period and the Talmudic geography. So the Jews are found in between Nippur in the south, or the rabbis rather, Nippur in the south, and Pumbedita here in the north, in this area of Iraq, where the two rivers are closest. The empire at the time were the Sasanians, and they left us a number of important, impressive rock monuments. I won't be talking about these, but one can have a sense of how they saw themselves. Here on the left, you'll see the Roman Emperor Valerian having been captured by the Sasanian king, for example, in the 3rd century. The religion of the rulers is, of course, Zoroastrianism, and this is displayed, for example, in their coins, which consistently depict the main icon, which is the fire. Should I say altar or holder? I'm not so sure now, but so this is the image that we have here. We have many sources, historical sources on the Persian empire, on the religion in this period, but I wish to focus today on the Jewish sources. So there are two main types of contemporary Jewish sources for this period and region. They're epigraphic and literary. The epigraphic are primarily these incantation bowls. This is an example of one. They've been found in situ in Iraq or assumed to originate there. They're typically written to protect or to heal a client who is named in the bowl. When it's written in this Jewish Aramaic dialect, it's clearly a Jewish scribe who's written the bowl. And the purpose is limited, but we can learn a lot from such items about all kinds of matters, perhaps less about kingdom and so on. Just on the notion of symbiosis, I'll just mention that the majority of the names of the clients who are named in these bowls actually have Persian names, a large number Zoroastrian theophoric names. It would seem that a lot of the clients of these Jewish bowls were Zoroastrians. So the key literary source, and the one from which I'll be drawing most of my sources today, is the Babylonian Talmud, or the Bavli. This is a massive work composed in Aramaic and in Hebrew with an encyclopedic range. So it's formally organized as a commentary on the Mishnah, which is a collection of rabbinic law authored in the land of Israel in the late 2nd or early 3rd centuries CE. But above these sources, in addition to the Mishnah, are many rabbinic sources also from the land of Israel, earlier and contemporary, such as the Jerusalem Talmud, And there's a close relationship between the Bavli and these traditions. But there is also a mass of material that is local, Babylonian material reflecting on all sorts of topics. And this is the bulk of the Bavli. So the Bavli cannot really be described as just a commentary on these earlier sources from the land of Israel. It is best understood as the expression of rabbinic culture in a large sense developed in Sasanian Babylonia. And it's important to remember that Bavli is a work created in the Sasanian world by rabbis who lived there and experienced life under the Persian Empire. So what about Persia? You won't find in the Talmud a systematic or an extensive discussion on the Persian Empire or religion. Instead, it is from anecdotal references, allusions, imagery, motifs, a choice of vocabulary, Persian loan words that one can learn about relations between Jews and their Persian neighbors, or Persian religion, the Persian legal system, and the Persian imperial rulers. So there are stories that mention kings, officials, soldiers, common people too, and sometimes all kinds of snippets and side remarks. One that I like, Rabban Gamliel said, I love the Persians for three things. They are modest in their eating, they are modest in the privy, and they're modest in the other thing that couples do together. So another saying that appears in En Passant, the Persians eat all kinds of meat dishes without bread. It's a complaint. There are also sources that depict encounters between rabbis and Zoroastrian priests and talk about Zoroastrian religious practice. And these are typically carefully redacted texts. They usually appear because of a problem, not out of some kind of curiosity. What is perhaps more interesting to me, and also a little bit more challenging, is finding the subtle ways that the Persian Empire and culture affect aspects of the Talmudic discourse, such as Jewish religious law or biblical exegesis. Looking beyond the explicit references, reading between the lines, one can reveal the impact of living in a Persian Empire. We can see how Babylonian Judaism differs from the Jewish culture that developed elsewhere, for instance, in the Roman world. The train of thought of the Babylonian Jews can often be discerned through what they chose to highlight, their omissions, through their comments and their subtle revisions of earlier sources. This is true for their approach to the Persian Empire and to their engagement with Zoroastrian rituals. We're going to see examples of this, first relating to the kingdom and then to the Zoroastrian religion. Let's start with a Bavli source that imagines a conversation between the Sasanian king, Shapur I, and the rabbi Samuel. It relates to the Messiah. I'll read the source. King Shapur said to Samuel, "You say that the Messiah will come riding on a donkey. I will send him my Borag horse." He replied, "But do you have a Hazar Gonin, a mount of 1,000 colors?" So the terms that are in Persian in the original, in an Aramaic source. So this exchange highlights the Persian equestrian expectations with the biblical prophecy. For the Persian, a person of standing rides on a horse, not a donkey. The king offers to provide one. And of course, we have the Persian word borag in this text. The rabbi has an answer. This is no ordinary donkey. It is something quite extraordinary, quite exceptional. The term again, or the phrase, comes from the Persian. The rabbi speaks the language of the king, both literally and conceptually. The humble Messiah just won't do in the Sasanian milieu. It requires an upgrade, something magical, magnificent. Still apparently a donkey, but what a donkey it is. I would say that the expectations conveyed here by the king, the equestrian values, have actually been internalized by the rabbi. This is, of course, a rabbinic source. It is not a Persian source. The rabbi and his community, it is an inner Jewish anxiety, and it is a Babylonian, and it is the Babylonian Jews who have trouble imagining the Messiah riding on a donkey. The language of the king is also the language of the king has become the language of the Jews. They think like Persians. But here there is another aspect. The messianic expectation poses no threat to the kingdom. On the contrary, the king will help. This is a statement aligning the prophetic belief system of the Jews with Sasanian politics. The Persian king is an ally of the Jews, a sympathetic Cyrus. And I'll just mention before moving on that we have below the image of the Yemenite manuscript of this Talmudic source, which is very important because it preserves in the best way possible the original form of the Persian loanwords that appear here in this tradition. Let's take a look at another source, another audience before a Sasanian king. And this concerns King Yazdgerd I. So here's the source. Rav Ashi said, Honabar Natan told me I was standing before King Yazdgerd and my belt was hanging low. And he raised my belt and said to me, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, citing from Exodus, is written concerning you. And when I came before Amemar, he said to me, the verse was fulfilled through you, and kings shall be your nursing fathers. A verse from Isaiah. So we have here three rabbis. A rabbi appears before the king and tells what happened to another rabbi, to Rav Ashi. And then Amemar is told about this occurrence, and he cites a verse. So what's going on here? A belt was probably a sign of some considerable dignity, and the allusion is to here. The king quotes a biblical verse, which should be understood to allude to the greatness of the Jews as a nation, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, or as it was translated in the Targum at that period, kings, priests, and a holy nation. Amemar, who hears this, recalls another verse from the Bible, a verse of comfort, of prophecy. And the kings shall be your nursing fathers. The kings of the nations will be helping the Jewish people. And so the whole scene here is one of intimacy, of identification, and of respect. But let us consider some more subtle ways that the Bavli expresses an attitude towards the Persian kingdom. Here we have a tradition from the Jerusalem Talmud. It's from the land of Israel, and it's transmitted in the name of a rabbi called Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Hezekiah, I'm reading from the left column here. Rabbi Hezekiah and Rabbi Jeremiah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it's a virtuous deed to see the notables of the kingdom, so that when the kingdom of the Davidic dynasty arrives, he will be able to distinguish between one kingdom and another. So the purpose of seeing the Roman officials, high officials, is tied to the arrival of the Messiah, the hope for the Messiah. Now, here we have on the other side of the other column, we have the Bavli, which essentially revises the same tradition. Rabbi Yochanan said, one should strive to run to greet Jewish kings, and not only Jewish kings, but even Gentile kings, so that if he will merit it, he will distinguish between Jewish kings and Gentile kings. So here, again, Rabbi Yochanan, again, about Jewish kings and Gentile kings. But this tradition is very strange. because at the time of Rabbi Yochanan, there were no Jewish kings. In the 3rd century of the Common Era, there were no Jewish kings. There had not been for quite a few centuries. It still alludes to the messianic expectations, so that if he merit it, refers to if the Messiah will come. But nevertheless, it is confused. But it is confused and confusing for a reason. Because it wants to recommend the virtue of seeing the Gentile kings. And this becomes clear from the broader literary context, since it comes next to the following tradition in the Bavli. And this is a topic that concerns reciting a benediction, a blessing for exceptional events, a sight, a wonder. And so here we have a tradition where the Bavli says the following. The rabbis taught, one who sees Jewish sages says, and here is an abbreviated part of the blessing, blessed are you, our God, who has bestowed a part of his wisdom to those who fear him. What about Gentile sages? He says, blessed, etc., who has bestowed a part of his wisdom to flesh and blood. One who sees Jewish kings says, blessed are you, etc., who has bestowed a part of his glory to those who fear him. And for Gentile kings, blessed is are you who has bestowed a part of his glory to flesh and blood. So we have here a statement of law, of rulings, of the obligation to say a benediction on seeing a sage and a king. And the version of the blessing differs slightly, whether it's a Jewish slave, or whether it's a Jewish sage, or a Jewish king, or a non-Jewish sage or king. But essentially, we have here a straightforward statement. I could add, just as an aside, that when the Jewish writer Shai Agnon received the Nobel Prize for Literature in Stockholm, when he arrived there and he at the ceremony, upon receiving the prize from the king, he recited the blessing and turned to the academy that had chosen him, and he made the blessing for seeing the sages. And so that's just an aside. But what we have here is a statement that is introduced with the words the rabbis taught. This is the way that old rabbinic traditions from the land of Israel are introduced. It's a technical term. It would confer upon this tradition much authority and antiquity. However, we can be suspicious about this tradition or about its antiquity because it only appears in the Bavli. That would seem to indicate that the Bavli has come up with it, and it was produced in Babylonia. It wants us to assume it comes from elsewhere to gain all the prestige that these early rabbinic traditions have. But at any rate, it is a very far cry from the statement we saw earlier by Rabbi Yochanan about seeing Gentile dignitaries or kings. The Bavli, after this tradition, a source I won't quote here, tells a story of a Babylonian rabbi, who made great efforts to see the Sasanian king and his entourage as they passed by. And so, evidently, it is the Bavli where blessing the Gentile king has become a religious ritual act, one that does not even require or is not compared to the Messiah. So we can see here indirectly how the Bavli relates to the Persian kingdom and how this differs from the rabbinic traditions in the rabbinic sources from the land of Israel. So we have now, until now, we've been speaking about traditions about kings. Now we're going to talk about the image that the royal Persian palace has on depictions of the rabbinic scholarly institutions, particularly the Rabbinic Academy or Yeshiva. There is a story when a key scene takes place in the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yochanan, It is set in the land of Israel, but the story in the Bavli is in the Bavli. So the imagery really reflects the Babylonian realia. Here is the key section of the source. A student undermines the reputation of his master, Rabbi Yochanan, by posing questions that he cannot answer. Perhaps that happens to you. So to visualize the decline of the master, we are told that he was seated on 7 mattresses, and for each time he could not answer a question, he lost one of the mattresses. So in the text we have here, just in this part, it says, in the red, Rabbi Yochanan was seated upon 7 mattresses. They pulled out one mattress from below him. He was given another tradition, and he couldn't. Rabbi Rav Kahana is the student here, raised a difficulty that he couldn't answer, and then they pulled out another mattress until he found himself sitting on the ground. So this image of an important person sitting on 7 mattresses or having 7 cushions of that kind of style is found in Sasanian artifacts that show the king or other nobles with 7 or a similar number of cushions beside them. I'll show you a couple of images here. Here we have 2 silver objects from the late Sasanian period. On the right, we have the king sitting in the middle, and beside him is a pile of cushions or mats of some kind. It is symbolizing his dignity. Beside, we have perhaps nobles or servants, and we have other things on this bowl. But the point for me here is the image of the number of mattresses beside him. On the left one, we have an important person resting on a couch, and there are entertainers and other characters beside him. But we have again the large number of cushions beside him. And this is an image that is associated specifically with the most important people in the realm. The cushion is intended to express dignity and honor in this culture. So Rabbi Yochanan, in the story we just read, is depicted as if he is a king or a very high noble within the academy. That's how he is imagined. I'll bring you another story that makes a similar kind of analogy. The story is the story of the head of the academy, of the rabbinic academy, who is deposed. And then they choose to appoint a replacement, whose name is Elazar, the son of Azariah, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Azariah. So we have this story in the 2 Talmuds, in the Jerusalem Talmud and in the Babylonian Talmud. And so we can compare the 2 versions and see how they differ. The Jerusalem Talmud is the earlier version, and so we have here on the left. They went and they appointed Rabbi Elazar, the son of Azariah, in the academy, meaning they appointed him as the head. He was 16 years old, and his whole head filled with white hair. So in this story, he's a young man. He's 16, and so his hair became grey, became white overnight, and this was so that he would appear more dignified, more respected, older, in order to lead the academy. So that we understand fairly clearly. When we look at the Babylonian Talmud version of the same, it's portrayed in a slightly different way, an expanded way. This Elazar ben Azariah is asked if he wants to become the leader of the academy. So he went, and I'm quoting, he went and consulted with his wife, like any good person should do. And she said to him, "You have no white hair." On that day, he was 18 years old. A miracle occurred, and he was encompassed by 18 rows of white hair. So we should note, first of all, what's the same. He's a young man. He's a very young man. He shouldn't have white hair. But a miracle occurs and his hair turns white. But the Bavli doesn't say that. It says he was encompassed by 18 rows of white hair. This is a different image. This is quite a remarkable image. It's a striking image. Where does it come from? So when I think about 18 rows of white hair, I I think of the images that we see of the Sasanian kings on the rocks. It's also true, I think, for earlier kings. But nevertheless, here we for the Assyrian kings even. But nevertheless, if we look carefully here, you'll see the kings have all these curls. They have numerous curls on both sides. This is the image you see also on the coins. You see it on other places. It's a striking image. It's a hairdo fit for a king, and this is how the nobles, the high nobles, um, appeared in the imagination and in reality in the Sasanian period. And so I'll mention that it's not just in these images. The Arab historian Tabari has an episode where he describes the last king of the Sasanians, Yazgir III, running, fleeing away, and hiding, and people saying that they saw him. And how do they describe it? How do they ask for him? They say, we saw this man with long curls and of hair. And that was the sign that this was the king. So, nevertheless, it would seem that in our Talmudic story, the person who becomes appointed to head the yeshiva acquires a hairdo fit for a king, because they imagine the academy a little bit like a king, like a kingdom, and the head of the academy in the image or as like a palace, and the head of the academy like the ruler in the academy. One last one last source on this topic has to do with dream interpretation. The Babylonian Talmud has a large section full of dream interpretation, and people tell the dreams, and they're told the interpretation of the dreams. And so, one place, a rabbi says to the dream interpreter, "We saw a young ass stand before our cushion and bray." Okay, so that's the dream. Now the interpretation: "You shall be a king, and an Amorah shall stand beside you." So how do we get to this interpretation from this dream? So one thing we can clarify at the beginning: the heads of the academy were not just imagined like kings, but the word king was actually employed to describe them in the Talmud. The head of an academy is a king, and he reigns. And so that means this person will become the head of the rabbinic academy. That's what "you shall become a king" means. The Amorah was the assistant, an assistant of dignity, who conferred upon the person a certain kind of honor by having this assistant stand beside him. So that we understand from the image here. But how does this connect to the young ass standing before a cushion? So we've already mentioned the cushion as a sign of honor, as respect. So that is also connects to the honor that's conveyed here. So some of you, we just in the last talk, God mentioned towards the end reference to Herodotus and to Darius. And so some of you might recall from Herodotus the scene of the selection of Darius, where where there are 7 contenders for the throne, and the one whose horse neighs first at sunrise will become the king. And so we have that image here. And through a ruse, Darius becomes king. But nevertheless, here we have the same notion. The young ass is like a horse who's braying, announcing that the person will become king. This image is striking, and it's exceptional. But nevertheless, it connects us to this ancient tradition, which we know from Herodotus describing Darius, of the palatial association with the rabbinic academy. Okay, let's move on to another topic. So the rabbis drew upon a popular palatial imagery to depict their own educational establishment. But did they share anything else with the Zoroastrian religious educational practices? One cannot say, for example, that the rabbis And unlike with Christianity, the rabbis did not share a religious text with the Zoroastrians. But there is something that they did share, and that is a notion of orality. And this comes up in an interesting source in the Bavli that we can look at here. The Talmud is talking here about the needs of a scholar and the definition of a scholar and the requirement for a scholar not just to study, but also to apprentice with an expert. And then he will learn all kinds of things that he can't learn, let's say, from the theoretical or just from the scholastic books. So we have here a tradition about he who read scripture and recited oral rabbinic traditions, but did not serve as apprentice to a scholar. He's lacking something. So what can he be compared? And so one of the answers given here in the Talmud is that in the name of Acha, the son of Jacob, he's like a magos, a Zoroastrian priest. And how is that so? We have a folk saying. The Talmud here cites a folk saying. The magos mumbles and he understands not what he says. The Tana recites and he understands not what he says. So we need to explain here this situation. The Tana in the rabbinic educational hierarchy has a certain function. He's a little bit like a living book. He has to memorize and then recall on demand rabbinic traditions, which it was forbidden to write down. So therefore, he was a walking book. He would memorize, he would recite. Perhaps he wouldn't understand, but nevertheless, he was quite a capable person. But here they're not impressed by him. They say the magos mumbles and understands not what he says. This source reveals something striking about the rabbinic Jews' knowledge of their neighbors, the Zoroastrians, because the Avestan texts, the Zoroastrian religious texts in this period were recited by memory without the Zoroastrian priests understanding them, or almost not understanding them. They didn't understand the language, and they perhaps had only a general sense of what was in these texts. And so the rabbis understood that. The rabbis knew that. In fact, it's a folk saying. It was almost famous. Mumbles is not an ideal translation here for the Aramaic term, which refers to the way that the Zoroastrian priests would recite the Avestan texts. But nevertheless, it's a word that's used here, but they don't understand what they're saying. The Tana can be compared to this because he doesn't really understand what he says. That's the criticism here. The reality, of course, was something different because the Zoroastrian priest didn't have a way to understand the Avestan texts. Philology wasn't developed in that period, and he couldn't access them. The Tana, he could serve as an apprentice to a scholar, and then he could understand better what he said. At any rate, he probably did understand the vast majority of the Hebrew text that he had to memorize, since the language was known and understood in the rabbinic world. This is an example of a comparison, an awareness of the other, of some kind of a way in which the rabbinic scholastic world and the Zoroastrian scholastic world somehow interacted in one way or another. Let's move on now to Zoroastrian religion. Very briefly, the question of Zoroastrian religion in the Bavli is a large and complex one. The Bavli complains about the Magi, the Zoroastrian priest, interfering in Jewish life with respect to issues that were sacred to Zoroastrians. For example, the purity of fire, water, or burial in the earth, because the Zoroastrians exposed their dead. They didn't bury them. And it would seem that they objected to others burying their dead. So here I would like to look at a case where the reference is subtle and perceived through comparison with another source. So let's take a look at this tradition here. A prophecy for the Messianic era. We have Rabbi Yosef, the son of Kisma. When he lay dying, he said to them, the people who had come to visit him, "Bury my coffin deep, for there is not one palm tree in Babylonia to which a Persian horse will not be tethered, nor one coffin in the land of Israel from which a Median horse will not eat straw." This is a source that is set in the land of Israel. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Kisma, is a rabbi from the land of Israel, and he makes a bedtime prophecy about the coming of the Messiah. And it's quite poetic and oracular. We have the Persian and the Median, we have the palm tree, and we have the coffin. This is what we have here. But when we compare it with a parallel in a rabbinic source from the land of Israel, from the same time period, perhaps earlier, we can see how it has reframed the message entirely. So here's a source from the land of Israel alongside our source. The left column, it's from a rabbinic work called Midrash Lamentations Rabbah. And we have it as follows. Rabbi Simon, the son of Yochai, taught, "When you shall see a Persian horse tethered to the graves of the land of Israel, expect the feet of the King Messiah." So here the source is the name of a different rabbi, Simon, the son of Yochai. He lived right in the 2nd century, right after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So you can understand that he is hoping for a Persian victory over the Romans. And he describes it with the Persian horse tethered to the graves of the land of Israel. Now, why the graves of the land of Israel? Well, he is thinking about the resurrection of the dead. That will happen when the Messiah comes. That all makes a lot of sense. But the Babylonian Talmud has revised this tradition. Of course, it has given it a different author, but that's not a major thing. Bury my coffin deep. Yossi, the son of Kisma, is worried that when the Persians and the Medians arrive, they're going to exhume his body from his coffin. This is something very different. This is the fear of the Zoroastrian priests exhuming the dead from their graves. That is described a few times in the Bavli. Christian sources also deal with it a lot. And so therefore it seems to have been quite a common complaint for non-Zoroastrians in the Sasanian Empire. The Babylonian Talmud isn't dreaming here about the arrival of the Messiah. It's thinking about the Zoroastrian priests inflicting their persecution on the Jews of the time. And this is the revision of the source that tells us a little bit about what's on the mind of the rabbis in Babylonia. I'm on to my last source, and this source has to do with Zoroastrian deities and how they may have been understood by Jews in this time, in this period. The Bavli provides a series of marvelous encounters and sights attested by a rabbi named Rava. And in one instance, he declares the following. Rava said, "I myself saw Hormuz, the son of Lilith, jumping over the domes of the rampart of Mechoza. And a horseman pursued him, riding his mount beneath, and could not catch him." This is the source. Hormuz. Who is Hormuz? He is Hormazd, Ahura Mazda, the main Zoroastrian deity. He is moving fast, perhaps on a horse, like this image below of the Zoroastrian of Ahura Mazda in a Sasanian rock image. Now, why is he the son of Lilith, or according to another version, son of Lilith? Lilith, the demon, the demoness. This can be compared to other other sources, incantation texts that describe Zoroastrian deities, other Zoroastrian deities, Anahid and Spenta Mainu as demons, as Liliths, and so we have here a demonization of the Zoroastrian deities by the non-Zoroastrian religions in this time period. We encounter it on the magic texts, like the magic bowl that we saw at the very beginning, and here again we see the same thing in the Talmud. The Zoroastrian, the deity of the other, has become a demon. The Christians were doing this as well in this time period. So that's the final source. Let's see if I can have a few words to conclude. So we've seen examples of attitudes towards the Persian Empire, the integration of certain features of the empire within the rabbinic world and imagination, and a rather positive view of the empire. These examples, and their examples, are typical of the mindset of the Babli. Perhaps it's a diasporic mindset. The relationship to the Zoroastrian religion is different. But here too, the sources reveal a complex relationship and a sophisticated way of understanding the how Zoroastrianism might have impacted the Jewish practice is necessary. But ultimately, we can say that the motto of the rabbinic rabbis of Babylonia was embrace the kingdom, but perhaps condemn the Zoroastrian religion. So thank you. I look forward very much to your questions and comments.
Well, thank you so much, Geoffrey, for this wonderful talk. We had, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, two great presentations, which bring up a lot of questions. So I have a few questions myself, but I think I'm going to go to the audience first and go through the questions there first. Gad, this is for you. Did Zoroastrianism exist at the time?
Just turned on my audio again. So Zoroastrianism, I called it in my presentation Achaemenid Zoroastrianism. So it's not the same type and not the same character of Zoroastrianism necessarily that we have today. And like I said, every religion always evolves, and this is the Achaemenid version of Zoroastrianism that existed at the time. But it is certainly of the same pedigree. It is the same DNA of the Zoroastrianism that we know today. So Zoroastrianism, in a broad sense, existed in the Achaemenid period.
Thank you, Gad, and thank you for making it short because we can get to as many questions as possible. This is for Professor Herman. Were the healing bowls used to bless the food or liquid that was consumed or imbibed by the sick person, i.e., was the word a healing prayer? Excuse me. We see similar hand healing magic in the Islamic period in Iran and the Persianate world.
Thank you very much for the question. I could talk so much about this. We're very, very fortunate that it wasn't the case. The bowls were written on ink, with ink, and then buried in the ground, and it's for that reason that they've survived. They were not. There's no indication that contents or food or anything else was put inside them. They contained a very long text or a text requesting healing and all kinds of things. There's a lot we don't know about perhaps the rituals that accompanied the use of these bowls, but the bowls themselves were not filled with something else. The archaeologists have confirmed that by their examination of the bowls. um, it seems that they were different customs with bowls that developed in the Islamic period um, than these than this practice.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you. Again is for the next question for Gad. We're getting a good alternation here. Dr. Barnea, um, someone has an earlier question. Ashton Cahan has a question about an earlier related work. Um, can he ask it for you? And I said yes, sure. So, uh, it, Ashton, can you come up and ask your question?
Sure. A while back, I read your book about early Israelite religion under the Achaemenid Empire, and in it you talk about identity fluidity and the Samaritan to Judean identity shift in Elephantine. My question is, do you think a similar identity shift could have occurred in Samaritans elsewhere, such as those existing in Assyria and Media post-exile?
Great. Well, thanks for the question. I'm not sure I fully understood it because I'm not really talking about an identity shift. I understand now it clicks. Yeah, we're talking about. So I assume that you're talking about my paper on the unified ethno-religious identity of Sumerians and Judeans, or really of Yahwists, between the two different provinces. That unified identity is documented across the entire diaspora. So we see, so just to give people listening to this some background, in a much earlier article, I was able to show archaeological evidence that there was in the late 7th into the early 6th century before the Common Era, there was a very clear, very strong religious reform or cultic reform in among Yahwists, whereby they standardized their personal names. Within the personal name, they standardized how to write Yahweh. So it was in the north, it was up until to a certain point, it was very consistently Yo, the theophoric element, the divine element in the theophoric name was spelled Yo, and in Judea it was Yahoo or Yah. And then at a specific point, early 6th century, give or take, there was a very clear, very systematic reform of names where all of the names, all of the Yo names simply vanished. And all the names, whether they are in Samaria, whether they're in Judea, whether they are in Babylonia later on, or in Egypt, have been standardized to Yahoo or Yah. So there is a standardization of names, and I contend in this article that there was a unified ethno-religious identity that you can call Jewish if you want, already in the 5th century, in the 6th century, around the time of the destruction of the so-called First Temple. There was already a unified identity beyond the boundaries of a specific province. So beyond just Judea, a person could be Yehudi beyond, even if they're not from Judea. And by the way, there's a lot of problems with necessarily assigning Yehudi to a specific province. I won't get into that right now. So yeah, I think, and let me know if I'm responding, correctly to your question. But basically, that reform, that identity reform, is seen everywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Gad, for your reply. Carlo Ceretti is thanking you very much, Professor Ceretti, for these very interesting presentations. Carlo, I was hoping that you could come up and make a comment or ask a question.
Not really. I mean, I've been
Yeah,
listening, very interested, and especially on the things that dealt a bit more with the coming of the Messiah, and so on. But I have no specific question. I'm very glad to have been here.
great. Thank you for being here. But I have two comments questions for each, if I may. Um, so, Gad, we have evidence of Jews from Hyrcania going to Elephantine as soldiers, and I think I got that from the Elephantine papers. Um, do you know about that? Do you know anything more about that? No?
Not Jews from Hyrcania. No, no,
No?
no,
During
no,
the
no.
Achaemenid period.
Not in the Achaemenid period, certainly, but not period. I mean, we don't have Jews from Hyrcania in Elephantine.
Okay. Okay, that
We
settles
have
that.
people from the area. I mean, it's a very cosmopolitan period, and we have a lot of people from different parts of the Caspian Sea, etc.
Mm,
And they're called Caspians
mm,
in this case.
mm.
But we don't have Jews from Hyrcania there. I mean, and they
Oh,
what something that's really interesting is that the only people in the Achaemenid period in general, not just in the Elephantine, who identify as Aramean are the Jews of Elephantine. Aramean. They
mm,
identify also as Jew,
mm,
also as Yehudi,
mm,
but they also say the same person, so we can know from the full name, including the
mm,
patronymic, that it is the same person. The same person can identify as Yahudi or
mm,
as Arami,
mm,
depending on the context. And that's also an extremely interesting point. But the only people that are actually documented in the Achaemenid period to be self-identify and be identified by others as Aramean are the Yaoists at Elephantine.
mm. Well, that's very interesting. I was not talking about the self-identification. I was talking about people being sent there as soldiers, which was
Mhm.
one of the functions of Elephantine, right? Um,
Correct. Well, I
yeah.
mean, let
So
me
yeah.
just on this point, yes and no. I mean, they were probably sent there as soldiers initially, as mercenaries.
Mm,
But the fact is that the archaeological and very detailed archaeological work has been done and continues to be done there. There are no weapons of force found.
uh,
So, and
oh,
we don't have any actual physical evidence that they were soldiers.
wow.
None
Oh,
was found. They
oh,
were, but they probably were sent there initially to do some kind of protective work. But later on, later on in the Achaemenid period, the border of Upper Egypt actually went down to the second cataract, so it was quite
mm,
far from the first cataract.
mm,
The second cataract now is somewhere, you know, below Lake Nasser,
mm,
but a few hundred kilometers to the south of the first cataract. So they at some point they found themselves. We don't know exactly when the border shifted, but they found themselves quite a ways away from the border. And they became landowners, they became relatively wealthy and things like that. So they probably did not remain mercenaries for very long.
mm. I will check my source and see whether it was a fiction of my imagination. But the connected to that was that during the Hasmonean period, you had Hasmoneans sent to Hyrcania. So I was thinking that there is a direct connection somehow
Well,
established.
yeah, so that's interesting. It's not directly, so I'll relate it. So I'm going to be very brief,
Yes, she, please.
but according to some I mean, we don't have a lot of sources on this, and we have to be very careful. But according to some sources, Artaxerxes III was probably the most, not probably, certainly the most violent of the Achaemenid rulers and bloodthirsty. And it looks like the Judeans and possibly even Sumerians participated in the rebellion in Tyre against the Achaemenids during his reign, and he came down on the people who on that rebellion very, very violently, and according to some sources, exiled them to Hyrcania. So that, or to that region. So that might, again, very, very careful because our sources are not very good on this, but there are echoes that you can hear that show that there was an exile, another exile of the Jews that we don't know almost anything about under Artaxerxes III, and really the only exile of Jews under Iranians in general, and to that region. So that could explain what you were talking about.
Thank you, Gerd. Thank you. And Geoffrey, from Josephus, if I'm not mistaken, we have this tradition that the Parthians, as opposed to the Romans, in relationship to the well, in general, in relationship to Hasmoneans, but there is this tradition that if you hear the foot of a Parthian horse or something, yeah, to that effect, know that the Messiah is coming.
Okay.
And
Yes.
there are a number of traditions. Have you heard about that, or can you
Yeah.
come?
I mean, okay. Yes. So, yeah, I have an answer to that, but let me just say first. I think the Hasmonean was exiled to Babylonia, not to Hyrcania. But where the name Hyrcanus became popular among the Hasmoneans and afterwards, and it's a mystery the origin of this name. But I think that one theory might be that it comes from there, but I don't think it's certain. I think it's a theory. So that might deal with the first one. Your other source is the one that I quoted in my lecture. It's in the name of Simon Bar Yochai. That if you see a Parthian horse,
Right.
it's a Persian horse because the rabbinic sources don't mention the word Parthian, but that is the source, and it's from the second century. It's from the second century. It is exactly that, the hope that the Parthians
That's
will
right.
come
I
and
was
save the
thinking,
day.
yeah.
So that's the source. That's the story.
Yeah. So the
That
connection between kingship and Messiah.
That's the connect. That's right. There, it's the connection. The purpose was to show how that source was revised in the Bavli from an earlier version. So the earlier version is more credible historically. The later version shows us how they were reading the reality and therefore imagining the reality.
Well, Ross Herman, thank you very much for the stimulating presentations that I agree with, and I'm sure a lot of our audience agrees with them. It was really fascinating. It was great having two brilliant scholars with us today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the audience can join me in thanking Dr. Barnea and Professor Herman. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. It's very pleasant.